Welcome to the Digital Literacy module, folks. I'm Professor Ryan Haas. In the short introduction podcast, Dr. Chelsea Dubé introduced the concept of digital literacy. And you noticed it's a broad topic. So digital literacy is not just about, knowing how to find good information online. It's not about just knowing how to use a web browser effectively. It's really the big umbrella of all these different competencies associated with living in what I would call a digital age, which means our lives are so enmeshed with digital information, with information technology, computers, smartphones, the internet, etc. Digital literacy is about all of that. Now, in this module, we're just going to focus on digital literacy as it pertains to finding and evaluating information. So I just want to make that distinction now, because really this whole class is all about digital literacy. Every single module could be considered a digital literacy module. But in this one in particular, this is kind of a good starting point because, like Chelsea talked about, if you don't start with a critical mindset, then you're going to encounter some pitfalls. So, without further ado, I want you to imagine this scenario. You're scrolling through social media and you see a shocking news story that makes your blood boil. Your finger hovers over the share or the retweet. Is it retweet still? Re-X? Doesn't sound right. Anyway, I'm saying retweet. Hovers over that retweet button. But wait, should you pause first? Today, we'll learn a simple 4-step method that professional fact checkers use to evaluate information in just minutes, not hours. So first, let's start by addressing the reality we're all facing. We live in what a lot of folks call an information-rich world, and that's putting it mildly. So more information is produced daily than previous generations saw in their entire lifetimes. And that's no exaggeration. I mean, in sheer terms of I don't know how you want to measure it. You could measure it by words. Absolutely astronomically more information. There are just millions and millions of gigabytes of new data generated on the internet every day. So social media, it amplifies both accurate and inaccurate information at lightning speed. But here's the kicker: emotional content spreads faster than factual content. So anyone can publish content that looks professional and authoritative, especially when we have helpful AI tools to help us refine our language. We have different AI tools that can help us make attractive looking visuals. So this is really not out of reach for you and me, everyday folks, to quickly create something that looks professional or sounds professional. So the challenge isn't finding information, it's distinguishing reliable information from misinformation quickly, because we need kind of rules of thumb that we can apply in minutes or seconds, not hours, right? So traditional fact-checking approaches, lengthy academic checklists, they are good. They're good for when we're doing, really high veracity research, but in day-to-day life, we need something more practical. And that's where I like this approach called SIFT. So SIFT is an acronym, and it's a strategy used by professional fact checkers. It stands for Stop, Investigate, Find, and Trace. So let's talk about the first step. So stop is about checking your emotions. So pause and check your emotional response. Are you reacting strongly to this information? Here's a key principle. The stronger your emotional reaction, the more important it is for you to fact check whatever it is that you want to share before you share it. Why? Because misinformation often targets our emotions deliberately. Content that produces strong emotions spreads fastest on social media, and we're more likely to share information that confirms our existing beliefs. And, I'm guilty of this too. Before you read, react, or share, ask yourself, do I want this information to be true or false? That's telling. And what's my immediate emotional response? And could my biases be influencing my reaction? So the I is for investigate. So this brings in something called lateral reading. And lateral reading is easier to do when you're on a bigger screen. Not that it's not doable on a smartphone, but this will be easier when you're on a laptop, on a desktop. But this is about opening new tabs, searching the source name, checking Wikipedia for background, because sometimes just establishing ground facts about the organization being presented or talked about, the people, the players, that can help you understand whether you're being presented something credible, reliable, or accurate, right? If someone is telling me that such and such economic policy is going to have these very specific material effects, and then I do a background check and see that on Wikipedia and see that, they're a YouTuber. Okay, well, fine. I might still think they have important things to say, but I can take that opinion with a grain of salt. Whereas if they're an economist, I might take them a little bit more seriously. Not to say that economists are all in agreement or anything, but it can kind of help you establish a little bit more about, what degree of truthiness or weight do I lend to what I'm being told here. And that's just our first step. And opening those new tabs and researching about the topic, that's what we're doing in this investigate phase. And we're looking at what other sources say about the same topic. Maybe one economist is telling us one thing and some others are telling us completely different things. Or maybe they're qualifying that advice or that statement, right? So this just basically helps us make a fuller picture. And really, you could probably argue that that's the whole point of this whole process. Find even more about looking for better coverage. So this is about looking for multiple perspectives, looking for experts to weigh in. Not that there are completely unbiased experts. I think we know this. But, if I'm reading an article about how a new drug has groundbreaking impacts on my memory or my motivation, that's good and well to try to see what other people's opinions are on it. But maybe a neuroscientist or someone who actually studies how pharmaceuticals affect the brain would have a more enlightening perspective on, what information I'm reading or learning about is really accurate and to what extent. And I've had to do something like this with my ADHD medication. I started by, watching YouTube videos where different people, non-experts, were, telling me about what medication that they chose to go with, or comparing different ones they've tried and the results, how it affected them. And then I would follow that up by finding YouTube videos and articles where doctors, where pharmacists, and even people who have more of an understanding of chemistry, I was going to those sources to learn, is this drug that I'm thinking about asking my doctor if I can try actually working the way these other people say it is? What could be side effects that I'm not aware of, or complications, etc. Right? You're just trying to build a full picture so you can make good decisions. That's really what it's all about. And so in this F step, some red flags to watch out for are when one source is reporting something as breaking news and it's only that source, right? If it's a big story, you're going to see it in different places. Another red flag is reputable news sources aren't covering a major claim, or the story significantly contradicts established facts, right? So it's like, that's where, again, the I and the F are similar, because it's like, if you go to Wikipedia and, well-documented events are being completely misrepresented, like historical events or something like that, then okay, this is not great information. So yeah. And then lastly, we have the T, trace. So trace is about following information to its source. Kind of goes without saying to me, but you need to trace information back, because if you've heard of the telephone game, well, this is the idea that you get in a line with a group of people, and the first person in line has a message. They whisper that message into their neighbor's ear, and that neighbor whispers the message into the next neighbor's ear in the line. And that keeps going till everyone has gotten the message, and then the last person in line repeats the message out loud. And often the end result is that through all of those transmissions, the information is so comically distorted that it sounds like a Mad Lib at the end. It's not even fully coherent a lot of times, especially as the group gets larger, right? And so you can imagine the same thing happens with, social media. If someone's telling you, in 15 seconds, they're breaking down the new bill that Congress is, has on the floor for votes, then they're not going to be able to cover everything in 15 seconds, right? Because you see videos like that on TikTok all the time. They're like, let me explain this very nuanced socio-political issue in 15 seconds and from my very specific ideology, right? And so this gets picked up, and if you don't go back to the original sources, then you're not going to get a very good full picture. So some common problems with secondhand reporting are the important context gets lost. Think about all the way that people take parts of quotes, parts that sound really good or really bad, and they just play that as a soundbite, or they do a big scary headline. Such and such person said that they said this, and they show kind of the worst part of what someone could have said. Or sometimes the worst is when someone is like speaking, they're giving an example, and that example gets taken very much out of context as proof of something that is really not at all what was being said. So preliminary research often also gets presented as definitive, and you'll see that all the time with these magical new wonder drugs that are always coming out, right? And then more research comes out, and more side effects, right? When there's a new drug that also happens to be a publicly traded company on the stock market, then it's always a really big deal when they have success in the stage 1, stage 2, and especially stage 3 trials. But those are trials, right? And so when preliminary stuff gets presented and we just take the hype and run with it, that can be problematic. So what can you do to trace things? Well, if it's a research study, you want to find the original paper, not just the press release version of the paper, because those get exaggerated and often just misinterpreted, right? Have you ever read a physics paper? Good Lord. Not that I read physics papers, I've tried. And then quotes, verify, if it's from a speech, one little excerpt, find the full speech. If it's a comedy skit, people say awful things in comedy, but in the context of they might be making fun of someone who said an awful thing to them, right? And you can cut that down and say, look, this person's evil, right? And miss the whole point of why that thing was said. With statistics, find the original data source. There are lots of different sources that collect data. Like when I'm working on a dashboard, an economics dashboard. So I get data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and other sources, right? You want to verify that what pretty chart is being presented to you has real data behind it, that you know where it comes from. Images and videos. So you can use reverse image searches. This is a really nifty way. All right. So now SIFT is great for everyday information. But when you need to do deeper research, this is where you're going to need to turn to academic databases. So sure, Google is convenient, but academic databases offer peer-reviewed content, which means that experts in a related field have evaluated the research being presented to them before they ultimately allow it in. So there's a little bit of expert gatekeeping going on here. Now, should we just blindly trust experts? I should hope not, but you would rather have a body of people with advanced degrees and or industry experience in a field related to what the study is being published in. Review that first, then just a layperson or worse, just people in power, right? I'm not saying power is not a dynamic here. There's no perfect journal, and AI content, really dumb, ridiculous AI content has slipped through presumably reputable academic journals before. But you would rather have some gatekeeping process with experts involved when it's studies you depend on for really important things like new drugs, new treatments, new approaches to therapy that affects people's lives and outcomes, or research and development that affects innovation, right? Technological innovation. This is stuff that you want. You want the best quality information because that's how science works. We have to build off of each other. We have to create a body of knowledge. And the whole idea is that that knowledge is testable, verifiable, repeatable, right? And if we're not actually doing diligence to verify things like that, then that's a problem, right? So that's where we turn to academic databases. And if you're wondering, okay, well, where do I find these academic databases? Check out, I think it's slide 12 in my slide set. These are the ETSU databases. And so check those out. We also have research assistants at ETSU, and it's as casual as just using an online chat. And I would bet your tuition helps pay for this, so I would use it. If you're having to do research for an essay or a presentation or what have you. The last part of this is about building better information habits. So here are 3 daily practices you can take with you. First, diversify your sources. Read across the political and ideological spectrum. Second, check before you share. Use SIFT on content that triggers strong emotions. And third, update your understanding. So ask yourself, what would convince me, or what would it take to change my mind on this issue? If nothing will change your mind, and you just want to double down and say, this is my ideology. I mean, at that point, that's just faith, right? And blind faith at that. But if you're okay with that, if you're saying, no, nothing will change my mind, this is just, I know it because I know it, then fine, whatever. But that's usually telling as to whether you really have a strong bias or whether you're open to information that might challenge your preconceived notions, right? And then what might I be missing from the story? How does this best fit with what I know? Or what am I reading? Who stands to gain from me believing it? Or from me being angry or elated, whatever, right? So remember, in conclusion, the entire SIFT process, ideally, it's just going to take a few minutes for most claims. We're talking about quick background checks, quick kind of cross-checking the stories that are being told, scanning. So we know, to what degree we should have, be able to trust the information at all, or just ignore it outright and say, probably not true. So these skills aren't just for academic research. This is just about things that we want you to do all the time when you're using social media, when you're watching the news, whatever. But they're not limited. These skills aren't just limited to, this academic exercise of always, seeking out the right, most formidable version of a narrative or whatever. It's more than that. It's about, if you're able to apply the SIFT approach effectively, you're going to be much less susceptible to things like phishing scams, which we'll talk about in cybersecurity. You're going to be much less susceptible to all kinds of sort of social engineering and manipulation because it's everywhere. Social engineering is used heavily in marketing, trying to get you to buy things you don't need, perhaps don't want. There's something in marketing and consumer behavior, there's a term called problem creation. And I think that's an interesting term because sometimes a real problem doesn't exist for us, but the marketer is good at creating it for us, right? Creating that problem in our heads so then they can sell us the solution. And once you're really aware of, these different kind of red flags, these different ways our emotions get toyed with, and our identities often, then it'll be easier to, make good lifestyle decisions, good decisions about our health, about our finance, not get sucked into the next crypto bro scheme because a YouTuber we like is advertising it. So that's a wrap on today's episode. So just remember, stop, investigate, find, and trace your way to more reliable information. Until next time, stay curious and stay critical, folks.